One. Hello? Okay. Finally. So how many of you all attended the IoT kickoff session next door? Wow. Was that great or what? Fabulous. So a couple of things before I run away. Sessions are there, multiple sessions on IoT, demo session at the campground as well as at the IoT zone. So please go ahead, try out your hand on that. Great. So before I begin, our standard statement, Peter.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Please make your buying decisions based on things that are available today. And you can read the statement on our website. So, before Mark Benioff in his recent interview with Fortune states, we are in an AI or artificial intelligence spring. The revolution in data science will fundamentally change the way we run our business. He further states we don't need more cloud, we don't need more mobile, we don't need more social. We need more data science. The whole concept of data science is that the software becomes the expert and you, as the average user, are able to understand what's going on. And it was this interview 4 months or 5 months ago that I started researching for this panel. I said, this is something great. But of course, there was IT cloud coming up as well, so I had to sort of intertwine it. But that sort of brought me into this whole discussion topic of precision engagement. And is this IoT era bringing in precision engagement? So let me introduce you to the panel. We've got Peter Coffey from Salesforce. Hi. We've got Sean Ford from LogMeIn. We've got Gino Zucca from Cisco. Russ from PTC ThingWorks. Alicia from Libelium. And we got Bill Briggs from Deloitte. So instead of starting the last time I was starting with the customers and partners, I wanted to point a question straight at you, Peter, because I know you're going to run away.
Because I have my wearables in the workplace session at the next hour. Yes, absolutely. Exactly. Okay.
So, what I want to say was, ask you was, are we really in that AI spring? Is what Mark talking about, the IoT cloud that we saw, what is your reaction to this?
The sheer quantity of data is not a corresponding quantity of value in proportion to its size. People are overwhelmed by data. There's a simple demo that we do for Wave Analytics where someone emails you a CSV file as an attachment. And you look at that, and it's marks on paper. It might as well just be spilled, poppy seeds on the page. But when 2 taps pull it into Wave, and the next thing you know, you're able to start, spinning and drilling and analyzing, now it has value. But even with Wave, it still depends on you to know what the questions are that are worth asking. Now, the next generation of statistics is not forming an hypothesis and then seeing if we can reject it or not, because that's what classical stat has always been. It's, here's the data. Are there clusters here? Are there patterns here? Are there things here that are incongruities? Are there things here that have always moved together and now are moving differently because that suggests interesting change? To me, that's what data science is, as opposed to just the ability to handle the zetascale or yotta-scale database, but to be able to ask the data, hey, what do you know? What's different? What's changed? Now, there are also very straightforward metrics of this. The fact that a data scientist can expect a starting salary getting close to 5 figures certainly suggests that someone thinks there's a pony under there. The fact that some of the world's largest companies, Cisco among them, have gotten together to form a consortium to fund the production of PhD-level data scientists, whom they will then compete with each other for the privilege of hiring, but simply to get some talent into the pipeline that's capable of doing the work at this level. Conversely, we had a conversation in Philadelphia a while ago where we said, if you're waiting for the PhDs to start emerging, why? The knowledge is changing so quickly that someone who started work on a PhD thesis 6 years ago may not even be at the leading edge of the profession. The minute you download Hadoop and have some people look at some data and find some business value in it, stats show you are now in the top half of your industry in merely having done that. Beginning to take action on the belief that there's unleashed latent value in data, that alone is enough to put you in the top half of most industries and in the top 9/10 in some that are still treating data as descriptive. Now, unfortunately, we all know I could go on like this for a long time. I'm going to shut up and let the panel get some oxygen.
So I might reach out to Bill because you run digital, you're the CD of Deloitte's. You run and meet customers and you help them through new and emerging. What are you seeing? What are you seeing from a Salesforce perspective, and what are you seeing from an industry perspective?
Yeah, no, so first of all, thanks for having us and getting the band back together again. This is always a highlight here. I think Peter hit on, it's the, how do we move, because IoT is the danger of being like big data. That gets abused in its massiveness, and it's confusing and leads to turmoil. How do you bound it into specific scenarios? I like to say the Internet of some things, brought together very deliberately for purposeful outcome. And the same with data. We have to get to the crunchy question and not be, we're anchored by incremental thinking, so we got to break out of that. And that's when you take AI and machine learning, advanced visualization, and then broader digital pieces like AR and VR and robotics, and you bring them to light for the business that might not know how those might be applied, and then help them answer a question of, is there value behind it if we can answer the question or do something differently with that bounded scenario? And then would we take the action that would imply, you know, it's a bit of an institutional inertia. Look yourself in the mirror and say, would we actually do that? Right? So is there a sphere of actuation around what that insight might give us? And could we and would we take that action? And then how do we actually put it into the hands of someone to do their job differently? Or how do we automate the system so we're not just sensing, but we're actuating around it, which is where you get the impact. So crunchy question, true insight, we take action around it and then drive impacts. Yeah.
I mean, I know, Alicia, you do a lot of work from a device perspective and sensor perspective. And you talk a lot about smart cities. And by the way, there's a session Alicia going to speak on smart cities. Bill's going to speak over Internet of some things in a few days' time. But talking about from a smart city perspective and from a data science and AI perspective, what do you see? What is happening out there?
Well, I'm seeing that for the first time, the IoT is being mature enough, if we can use the word mature in the IoT, if we are allowed to do so.
Adolescent, at least.
Well, if we can. But I'm seeing that there's a big change from the way that that the audience is looking at the IoT, from whether it was like the science fair project of some IT or tech person in an organization to be a strategical way to improve a business from the executive and C-level in companies and also in institutions. So that's the best example that you have in smart cities. For at the beginning, in the first wave of smart cities, this is spoiling a little bit my talk, we saw that it was like the project of the IT guy, and it has nothing to do with the rest. And now we are seeing for the first time the real conversation across all the departments in the city, thinking about, this is my problem, and the Parks and Garden guy has another problem, and the lighting guy has another problem, and they are putting context into the kind of information they can get. So I think there's a big change that gives a sense of maturity.
So in fact, I spoke to Russ and Gino, and you talked about intelligence going right down to the device, but I know Cisco talks about it as well. If I sort of, and I know Libelium and Cisco work on the smart city initiatives as well. So between the two of you all, I think you'll have got similar sort of thought, but slightly divergent thoughts. You talk about more about Cisco and putting your intelligence on the devices, whereas you're talking about a slightly different way of looking at things.
Yeah, so I think the question of whether we're in an AI spring, I think we are, and I think at ThingWorks and PTC, we acquired a machine learning company a couple months back because we actually see that now that IoT is creating enough data that it's well beyond the amount that a human can actually process effectively. So you really need to sort of augment the human with, you know, analytic and learning tools that help them see patterns and make better decisions. I think it's interesting that, you know, analytics, the way we think about it, there's really been two issues with it. Right now, there's a huge shortage, if you can say that, huge shortage. That's sort of oxymoronic, but of data scientists in the world. And so one of the things we think is a real opportunity in the world of machine learning and analytics is to democratize it, to not eliminate the data science in it, but to reduce the number of data scientists required to achieve the same outcome. And that was one of the reasons we bought Cold Light. And the other reason we bought Cold Light is we loved one part about them is they did learning at the big data level, but they could push their prediction algorithms in a very tiny footprint all the way out to the edge, which we think, and I know in talking with Cisco, it's a real important concept that you really don't want to be moving 3.5 million records from postage meters back to headquarters to determine if 6 of them need to be fixed. You want those 6 to tell you from the edge that they need to be fixed.
Gino?
Yeah, and if you do want to move those records, we have a lot of networking that we can sell you, but we know that's not really realistic in this world. But that would be wrong, absolutely. We know the world is changing. And I think what we are seeing is that we want to push intelligence out to the devices, but at the same time, there still needs to be filtering as we bring that information back up. And so these real-time systems work at a different pace and speed than we're used to in the IT world. And so there's kind of a transmission that needs to take place where you're running logic out in what we call the fog or in the edge, and that's as close as possible to the point of actuation. And then you're bringing the relevant data back and you're aggregating that data as you go through that. You obviously have to secure it, and that's absolutely critical. No customer today wants to be first into this space and expose themselves. So the science projects and other things are now being taken up by the risk and audit teams. The CIO, the CTOs, and the heads of operations are taking on these programs. And the reality is that now data is starting to get better governance. And again, we're having that transmission between out on the edge and the real-time networks and back inside the IT shops. And I think that's where the data and analytics and a lot of those things are going to take place. But to Russ's point, it's absolutely critical that machines start to get more and more involved as you start to deal with more and more things. And it's a collaboration between machines and the learning that goes on. It's not just a pure peer-to-peer communication anymore.
So in those terms, I know, Sean, we've spoken about, and I've had a couple of your customers on my session as well, and we heard about Xively being a partner on the IoT cloud side. We've talked a bit about, not theory, but we've talked about trends. But can you talk about some of your customers, what they're doing right now?
So just on the topic of trends, if you look and see, we did a bit of research with a company called Machina, and it was to look at sort of what companies are adopting, who are the early adopters in the IoT. And this was done as a global survey. And one of the things that we saw was that only of the people we talked to, about 21% of those people had active IoT projects. And of the 21%, 80+% were creating their own product in-house. So they weren't leveraging this ecosystem of intelligence, which are, we stepped back and said, it's a little bit like I need to drive from Boston to San Francisco, so what I do is I go decide to build a car, right, as opposed to rent or do that. So what we're finding is in those places, the people who are the early adopters, the trend we're seeing is that it is led by the C-suite. And the thing that we're also seeing is that they're defining the IoT activity that they have as something that they see as providing them with a strategic competitive advantage or revenue expanding, not as an operating expense or something that they want to try to just use for replenishment and inventory savings. And the reason that's relevant is that, as these companies move forward, again, to Alicia's point, they have to really structure how they're organized to support a connected business versus a connected product. And so what we're seeing in our customers who are these early adopters are that they have rallied around the holistic view of saying we need to rethink product design and we need to rethink how we go to market and how we build products so it isn't a product for its physical utility, but it's a product for its data capturing capability and data sensing capability. We see that they need to be able to incorporate the voice of the product in addition to the voice of the customer, so all that data. And then they need to structure their business in a way to support all of the ways they're trying to engage and transform with their customers. Those are some of the common trends and threads we've seen with the early adopters like Sato, like Simmons, like some of the others that are in the IoT zone here. And we're just excited to be a part of the ecosystem with Salesforce and with other people to help try to deliver that and make it real for companies out there.
I just want to keep that same trend, but I wanted to quote Peter Coffey on a blog that he wrote recently, Protocols for Tomorrow. You state, we must build systems that have enough rudimentary intelligence to ask, are you sure about that? What do you mean by that, enough rudimentary? Is that what Cisco talks about fog computing?
Well, that's a great question because there's a metaphor I've used before, forgive me if you've heard it, but when you touch a hot object and you jerk your finger away before you even feel the pain, that's a low-level mechanism dictating a very simple action that needs to be done very, very quickly. most of your thinking is at a somewhat higher level. You don't function at the reflex level all the time. A moment after that reflex arc jerks your finger away, a slightly higher level protocol says, ouch, that hurts, maybe I better put some ice on that. That's still a purely local thing, but it's got much more cognition involved because it understands certain behaviors and certain past domain knowledge, like you put ice on a burn. But you didn't have to go look that up. You knew that. On the other hand, that shouldn't be hot. The fact that that's hot means that something is wrong in another part of the plant, and sending an email to maintenance saying, hey, this line over here should be at about 90 degrees and it's running at 200. Someone should fix that. That's yet another higher level protocol. That one, it was not entirely biological. That one, you started bringing in some technology as well. But the idea that they're stratified systems, small, simple, local, immediate, intermediate, local cached knowledge, but acting with a little bit more thought, and then much higher level systems that involve global pattern recognition and collaboration. There's no one Internet of Things. There's strata of different levels of complexity, intelligence, and knowledge residency, and we need to be thinking at that level, or we're no more capable of functioning in the world of IoT than we would be as adults in a world of occasional hot things.
So we sort of touched on that side of things, intelligence, rudimentary intelligence at the edge, the trends. So I want to change slightly the tack back to my original question. Is IoT creating that era of precision engagement?
Let me go with the metaphor of spring. After all, we've got a 16-year history of beating the metaphor of cloud to death, so let's start with the spring metaphor. You get new growth in the spring, but if you want to optimize that new growth, you should have done your pruning in the fall. And if you look at the way most companies treat data today, 1/3 of companies are assessed by SAS as being what they call analytically challenged. They think of data as descriptive and historical, and if it says something that management doesn't believe, the data is dismissed. Only 1/8 of companies were considered to be analytically innovative, meaning they're prepared to be surprised by data, they're prepared to have their definition of their business changed by data, and they're thinking of data as the raw material with which to build recommendation engines and predictive models. That's a very advanced way of thinking about data that, as I've said, 7/8 of companies have yet really to begin to embrace. They don't have the talent and they haven't built the tools or adopted them, and yet if you're not prepared to do that, then you've decided that you want to be in the bottom 7/8. That's not a good place to be.
Russ?
Yeah, I think the question on whether IoT really is enabling this world of precision engagement. When I think of IoT, I really think the ultimate promise of it is essentially perfect efficiency in any process. And if you think about, Uber is a great example. I mean, you think about the process of, taxis driving around blocks hoping to run into a person who needs a taxi, where now you open up your phone and they route the closest driver to you. That process is getting almost perfectly efficient. And then soon they'll tell the drivers, you really want to be over here because at 3 o'clock there's 84
well, they do that
on
now.
average.
They're doing that.
And so you just think about that in smart farming or anything you do that is now sensorized, which is what IoT offers. It gives you stuff beyond just location sensing to enable these much, much better decisions so that things can move from their current level of efficiency, resource efficiency, materials, time, energy, et cetera, to sort of a step change. And I think it's unlocking really probably the next era when you think of like the agricultural age and the industrial age and the information age. I think the IoT age is really the next era of sort of the human condition.
That's such a perfect example, because if all you have were an app that let you call a cab, that would still not be what you're talking about. And if all you have was the Uber app that puts a card close to you and sends it to you, that's still not what you're talking about. Going from connected to intelligent to predictive is definitely a ladder that requires some climbing, and it takes some time to climb it. It takes a cultural commitment to being willing to be surprised and challenged before you're going to climb it with any vigor.
I like the idea of IoTs in strata, and I'm seeing that in the I'm looking at that in the way of the kind of stakeholders the IoT is attracting. And one example to explain the new engagement that we are seeing. When you are offering, when you are asked by companies, by tech companies, to deliver an IoT solution for a farmer in a field because they want to optimize the process, and they want to optimize their own business. That's one level of IoT. And when you have other kinds of companies that want to own the devices and want to install the devices on the fields to sell a service to the farmers and to sell the data to other farmers to share those best practices, then you are entering into this new engagement era that the IoT is enabling. And I'm saying that's the best example I have.
I mean, I think that's spot on, because it's, I mean, even precision engagement on how do we understand and serve customers better is a piece of it. How do we rewire business process for efficiency? We hit on is a part of it, but the thing is, how do we reimagine work? How do we reimagine business and markets? How do we truly transform? That's the piece that we're opening up that wasn't possible. And when people say, is this hype? The individual piece parts around, there's a lot of shiny objects in the periphery, but when it gets boiled back to, we have the chance to think about our industry, our market, our business, our people, how they work, our customers, how we engage. That's the play. And then it gets boiled down to piece parts like machine learning and IoT platforms for sensing and orchestration. And by the way, there's a big piece on the core which says, how do I bring that back in the mid-office that's not possibly ready to play in this type of a environment? How do we make sure if we need to remediate or replatform, we do it, or we make a very strategic decision about what we have isn't going to get us there? So how do we have a foundation for growth and innovation and our legacy footprint that's going to own a big part of our back and mid-office? And by the way, IT has to change along the way as well. So our Oregon delivery model of how we think about technology and delivering these services gets turned on its ear. So it's an exciting time.
I think Sean's raring to go.
No, well, so there's a whole bunch of thoughts. One is, to your point, Bill, I think that, and I think this was actually in something that you guys put together, but there's the whole idea of the CIO has to be the chief integration officer, right? There's a bit of responsibility to break down the silos that exist, because not only are we creating massive volumes of data, we're creating a lot of them still in silos. And without sort of building that sort of holistic view of the data and having someone who champions that across the company, it's going to really slow down. I'm not going to say it's going to stop the IoT spring, but it's certainly going to slow down the acceleration of product adoption, the acceleration of insight. And really, one of the things that we've said a lot, and I know we've talked about it, Xively, is that while data is the currency of the IoT, insight is the investment strategy. And so if you don't have both, then it's like you're burying your money in a mattress. Yep. And I'm marketing out. This panel was originally called 5 Engineers and an English Major, and I was the English major, so that's it.
I will give you direct attribution the first time I steal that. The second time, it's all mine.
Okay, that's fine. That's it.
That'll be done within an hour.
So just to touch on those points, it really comes down to what is the business outcome that you're trying to achieve. It's not about the technology. It's not about all the sensors that you're connecting. It's not about the farm equipment. It's how are you going to make more money, how are you going to save money, and how are you going to mitigate risk. And that's what the C-suite really cares about. And then you break those down into each of the areas. But I think collectively from a company standpoint, and it's the CIO, now there's the chief digital officer, you really need to be looking holistically and cross-functionally and saying within sales, leveraging the Salesforce platform, how do I become more efficient? How do I get better? But if you don't connect that to your back office ordering systems, then again, you continue these silos of data. So you have to think about what it is to become a digital business, and in the city space, what is it to become a smart city? It's not enough to connect your parking. It's not enough to connect your lighting. What happens in the interaction and the interplay of the multi-use case across those things with traffic and other? I'll just give a quick example. I drove to BART in Millbrae and spent about 45 minutes driving around the parking lot trying to find a parking space out of, 3,000 spots, not a one. I looked on Waze. It got me here a lot faster, and as much time as I spent looking for parking, I was here in San Francisco in a parking spot in a place that had a metered smart parking space. That's not the greatest thing for the environment, but at the end of the day, that made me a lot more efficient. And at the end of the day, when I become more efficient, I look for ways for my company, for my division, and then across the company to do that. And so I think it's about connecting individual silos within the organization. It's also about making people more productive as well, workforce efficiency.
And it's so important not to take one step that actually makes you seem less attractive to your customer when you really need 3 steps to get to the next level. We were using this example just the other day. Uber does surge pricing. This is a terrific idea because it gets to that point of perfect efficiency. You're charging the market clearing price. If you really want the ride, you'll pay the price. But some people react with great hostility to surge pricing. They call it price gouging. if Uber were to take one step beyond surge pricing and say, at the moment, there's a surge pricing multiple of 2x in effect. It's our prediction that this will drop to 1.5x in the next 30 minutes and back to 1 in the next hour and a half. Now that's not gouging, that's transparency. That's offering people choice. But if you go one rung up the ladder, well, now you're on a wobbly ladder. You haven't gotten to the top, which is where you want to be. And if you're not prepared to make bold moves, always thinking, how will this be perceived by my customer? What will the value to my customer be seen as? You're at risk of doing at least one of two very bad things. One, you could just wire up your product in a way that makes it easier for you to maintain it, but not pass any of those things through to the customer. Easy for you to design the next generation product, which just lets you sell the customer, an upgrade. And there's no customer value in that. The customer won't see value in that. If you're not prepared to make that data collection an act of co-creation with the customer, you have to expect that they may wind up feeling exploited by that, and that's not the mood you want. And then the next thing you might be in danger of doing is doing a better job of delivering your static mental model of what your product is, instead of saying, wait a minute, in a connected world, the post-sale experience is now the greater opportunity for delivering value and for realizing revenue. The product really just becomes the point of delivery of post-sale services, and I'm stealing with the Bandon from Ray Wang on this, which talked about the post-sale on-demand attention economy.
Yep.
It's a compelling vision. His book is on sale at the bookstore. But the post-sale aspect of what are the services that I can deliver through the channel that I've created by the delivery of the physical product? Many organizations are not yet ready to think of that because all of their intellectual property and all of their brain capital in their companies is organized around the model of make the product we sell and deliver as good as it can possibly be. And if they keep doing that as well as the Internet of Things lets them do it, they'll wonder what the heck happened because someone else has completely eclipsed them in the market.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I just read a book by Peter Thiel called From Zero to One. Oh, yeah. And it's really a great discussion of the incremental improvements that most businesses are based on today, and brand new and innovations. Like I would say Uber took a couple things that were commercially available and created an innovative way to call taxis. And so if you're in business and you're thinking, how am I leveraging the Internet of Things? One of it is going to be you can do it in a tactical way to improve efficiency 6 or 8%. Or you can do it in a strategic way where you really change the way your service or your product is actually seen and delivered in the market.
And most 1/8 of companies are really ready to think that.
And that's right. So when you think about any efforts you're doing, you should be thinking, which side of that fence am I on? Am I on the incremental improvement, which is still valuable, or am I on the 0 to 1? Because if you're not, it's very likely that one of your competitors is.
I would just add, I think that's right, but there's a little bit of paying short shrift. So many of the companies that are trying to build connected products are working up such an unbelievably tough learning curve. I mean, if you think about it, if you're a manufacturer, you haven't really spent a lot of time, most haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about, apps and all of this issue of connectivity. I mean, it's not a simple thing. Some of us in the tech world, think, well, this doesn't seem that hard, but it is a massive learning curve. And I think that, really, if you get there and you want to build that connected business, I'm in the place that says there needs to be a massive rethinking about how products are initially conceived and brought to market. And it isn't just building for connectivity, but it's more, if I tell you that there's a light bulb, and I'm a light bulb maker, or a light bulb company, and I make a bulb that accomplishes the utility with which it was designed, which is to turn the light on, and I can control it with an app, great. And you'll build things like that. But if I said that the light bulb company, and you step back and say, you have the ability to put a product in every room of every house in the entire world and have it be connected, what would you build? And by the way, it has to have some light to it. And so you might have an entirely new set of potential information and interactions with people if that's how you conceive of things. And that's really what we need to see people doing.
That's a real outside-in way of thinking. Yeah.
So it takes vision and conviction. When we talk about incremental efficiencies that can be gained are the easiest ones to get launched, and that's where we're seeing a lot of experimentation. It's the places where, because think about it in a retail scenario, doing an actual store of the future the way you read about, and a lot of players are trying to get to that. It requires not just the store operations, but merchandising, your sales folks, your commerce division is set up separately. I mean, it's a cross 5 or 6 C-level executives that have to cooperate and agree on the vision one, and then agree on the investment that's But again, if it's done the right way, that's part of the path of truly what the growth strategy is for the organization as a whole. But how do we elevate beyond the tactics, which are going to be there? It's not that there's not value behind them.
Is the cultural difficulty of doing that the reason that so many companies are turning to a skunkworks model?
Yeah.
Let's get some guys or gals who are just physically off the premises and whose only job is to come back and shock the heck out of the rest of us.
Yeah, so colleagues of mine, John Hagel and John Seeley Brown, how do you scale at the edge?
The original Macintosh team.
Right, the institutional antibodies that are there to crush. I mean, it's amazing the resiliency of the organization to protect the problem it was originally formulated to solve, right? And so part of it is that. And the mission needs to be, how do you truly be the one that disrupts the core? And then allow it to go and not expecting it to come back in to be scaled early. It's going to replace the core over time. And that's the only way we've seen. I mean, that's the model that at least Hagel and JSP, and we've seen that work. But
so I know we've only got 9 minutes, but I wanted each of you all to have a quick answer to a question that I put. What is the one piece of advice for business leaders interested in leveraging IoT and precision engagement? So if I ask each of you a couple of minutes to speak, then I'll hand it over to the audience for that.
Take the question one more time.
Okay. What is the one piece of advice for a business leader interested in leveraging IoT and precision engagement?
bounded scope and purposeful outcome is a place to start. Bounded scope and purposeful outcome.
Scope and outcome.
Look at the IoT as just a tool, as the same way that they look at their computers sitting in their offices, not as a business per se, and think beyond the connectivity options and the efficiency options that we have seen that work, but start thinking about how to leverage that into a better customer experience, because that's where the real value starts.
So tool, efficiency, and customer experience. Russ?
Yes, I've always been tough keeping things to one. You know, I'm a two and three guy.
There's a book about that.
That's right. Yeah, so from 0 to 2 is actually this is. So I would say first thing, because we're in this business. I've been in it since 2009, and what I would say to every company is, if you're not doing something in IoT, build a small team and have them go try something. Because I'll tell you a great story. Borders Books and Music really didn't believe in online book selling early in their business. And my brother's company was acquired by him, so I know this firsthand, so they outsourced their original website to Amazon.com. So I would just say you need to build up internal expertise to even if all the little small projects you do fail, you've gained a lot of expertise. Two, I think the market's changed dramatically. I think maybe Sean, you talked about people building a lot of this stuff bespoke. And I think when the early adopters started getting into IoT, there were no real solutions or platforms in the market. And so I'd encourage everyone, if they're going to do it, to really think first, why wouldn't you build it on a platform just like you'd build it on a web application server? And I would explore what's available in the market first.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely tell anybody that was coming to ask about IoT, it is here and now. This isn't a futuristic thing. You need to jump in with both feet and maybe start out small, to Russ's point. But one thing that we talk to our customers about is, how do you become a managed service provider? And I'll give you an example. It's actually a lighting company, a very large lighting company that all of a sudden decided they wanted to become a lighting as a service company. And when they started to service the things that they built, they realized how impossible it was to become a true managed service provider. You don't have to be a telco to be a managed service provider. And so they brought it back to the boardroom, the engineering boardroom, and they redesigned their product, and they redesigned the way they manage their business model, and they're working towards that annuity stream. But again, there are a lot of antibodies in there, which is why it also needs to be protected.
So it's almost what Alicia talked before, a new business model, something as a service. And Charlie always speaks about X as a service. Go ahead, Sean.
I think mine, I'll go with 2 since Russ opened the can of worms. I would say one is that that in the sort of fire hose that is data, just because you can measure anything doesn't mean you have to measure everything. So there's a little bit of being focused on exactly what it is you believe is the core capability of whatever product you have, focusing on that finite set to start out with of metrics that truly transform the customer's experience. You've got to have a passion to delight and engage and work with customers. So I would work backwards from that and find those pieces of data that do that most. Start there and build out. Otherwise, you'll just drown. And the second thing I would say is that I wouldn't underestimate the level of commitment in the organization financially from just a pure courage perspective to really get a bunch of these projects off the ground, and wouldn't underestimate the ability to need to work across the organization to make these things happen effectively. Otherwise, they'll just become pet projects.
So get rid of the noise and commitment.
It's very easy to get excited about how sexy this stuff can be. We've had some very enlightening real-world conversations with people in fields like oil and gas services, and we would talk about the ability to know things about the chemistry of the fluid coming off the well, and they said, raised a hand, said, look, I got a guy in a pickup truck. There's a 20-mile square field of wells. If he knows where are the wells that aren't pumping right now, he can be 2 or 3 times as productive on any given day as if he has to go wandering around looking for the well that's not working. Mm-hmm. And the only way you're going to get grounded in reality that way is by doing the ride along, the sit along, the unwrap along, going out there with a customer and finding out. And every time they have to go look up a piece of data, gee, why did they have to look that up? Why couldn't the product have had that available to them? Every time they have to fill in a form, why are they having to fill in a form when the product conceivably could have been capturing and relaying that data without even them having to consciously enter it in any way, but simply capturing it as a byproduct of use? That's how you'll find out what are the opportunities to redesign experience around the knowledge of connectivity and local processing capacity. Your customer doesn't understand it, and your engineers don't understand what the customer actually lives with. I'm going to finish with one last example. Mm-hmm. In rural India, clinics were having a problem where a procedure might require you to self-administer an injection 30 days later. And by the time the 30 days have passed, you're a little nervous. You're not sure you remember the instructions you were given. Maybe a large fraction of the time, one time through, you just say, oh, I might get it wrong. I'm not going to do it. And so then you wind up with the procedure not having worked. You wind up with the readmit. Total cost to everyone involved. The old way of doing that would say, we got to make the syringe easier to understand. We got to improve the printed directions. The actual solution was to put a QR code on the box that when scanned would play on your mobile device a 2-minute video showing you in the moment you need to do it how to administer that injection. Now, if 10 years ago I'd said, okay, we're going to solve the problem of 30-day post-processing of medical events in India by equipping everyone in the country with a portable wireless video display unit, yeah, sure you are. So the failure to think big enough, and this is something Mark Benioff said about our work with San Francisco School District, people have so much mental scar tissue from all the things they've been told they can't do, can't have, and can't afford, that just getting them to tell you openly and candidly, well, actually, this is what would make my job better, or my job easier, or me safer, or my life better, that's a tremendous challenge. It's almost an anthropological challenge more than a technology challenge. And that is where you're going to find the opportunities to Uberize your business and say, wow, this is the thing that people really want most from us.
So your punchline is think big. Think
big, but think big through the through the fingertip of the customer, and not through the kind of mind that brings, oh, I don't know, Hannah to market.
So I'll open it up to the audience. There are few microphones around. I might take the microphone out. Go ahead.
That didn't go unnoticed.
No, it didn't do it. See your name and
Thank you. Hi, Tobias here. I would like to pick up on the idea Mike Benioff voiced with his AI, artificial intelligence. Now, what I hear in this session and earlier, that is about IoT being kind of a state machine. Smileys, deterministic, functioning kind of machine. I believe that's the Internet of Things and the connectivity. That piece is the easy piece. I think where the real challenge comes in is for higher value services when you need to model uncertainty. So what is your take on that?
If we're having an AI spring now, it's because about 20 years ago we went through an AI winter that was produced by that kind of thinking about what AI should do. I went to a session once where Digital Equipment Corporation, if you remember them, presented the expert system they built to configure VAXs. The following year, they were back to present the expert system they built to maintain the rule base for the previous year's system, because maintaining the knowledge base for the system had turned out to be at least 10 times as difficult as building the original system in the first place. That was the AI winter that led us to a discovery that we need a system with the right amount of intelligence in the right place with the right kind of heuristics, instead of the massive, perfect reasoning machine, which is, I don't know, maybe that's what IBM has to work really hard not to let Watson become. Because we've seen that before, and it doesn't lead to scalable and sustainable delivery of services that people will value.
Oh, talking about you said about the business uncertainty. So, bye, Peter.
Bye, Peter.
And like that, he's gone.
One example. 4 years ago, we received a call from a company that was manufacturing chemical pills for the maintenance of swimming pools. And I said, oh, well, you are calling because you want to optimize your process, you want to improve your factory. And he said, no, we have a commoditized product, and I want to improve the customer experience. What I want to do is I want to install one of your devices in every single swimming pool I have. Where I have a customer, and I want to offer them a smartphone app, and I want to constantly monitor the water quality of the swimming pool and advise them with when do they need to apply the treatment in the water. But going one step further, because I will know the amount of stock that my customer has, I will say, okay, if you have applied the treatment, you are running out of pills, you want to buy the next batch, yes, click, which is a total killer application. And that was 4 years ago. And that was talking about customer experience, about using the IoT not for process optimization, but for customer experience. You know what happened? The project was presented to the executive level, and they said, no, we are not in that business. We are not selling that. That's just adding more cost, and we don't need that. Now they are thinking, what could they do to improve customer experience, to make a difference to their competitors, and even to diversify their business and generate more value? So yes, there are business uncertainty, but if you don't innovate in the process engagement, you're never winning.
And for just one question, I know we asked move out. Any more takers for a question? There's one.
How do you get enough of your machine learning down into the devices to make them smart enough?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because really machine learning, there's really two facets to machine learning. One is the learning, which is not something you can really do on the device, because you really need sort of a big data platform, and typically you're learning from a fleet of like assets to develop sort of prediction patterns and prescription patterns. So the way our software works is you do the learning in the big data side, and then you take the prediction routine, which is a lot easier to run, a lot less computationally intense, and you can put that at a pretty low footprint device on probably on one of your Meshliums or any of the Cisco gateways.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to kind of extend that, right? There are ways that you can embed data filtering and other things, but it has to be governed by the policies and rules that you learn. So, you know, to Peter's point, it's not about just taking all the data and pushing it back into the cloud and making all your decisions, because the real-time aspect is gone. It's about learning in the cloud, learning from these big data applications, and then pushing that down to the lowest level. And it's the policies and the rules. And again, as you start to see, when we start to talk about AI, you start to see things trigger and uncorrelated events that are actually connected as you start to look further back. But at any node in that strata, you can then make a decision and then report back.
We've run out of time. Thank you very much, each and every of you. Thank you very much.